Welcome to the course Knowledge Engineering with Semantic Web Technologies. This is Lecture 1, Knowledge Engineering and the Web of Data. In this part of the lecture, we are talking about the importance of meaning. In the last section of the lecture, we have seen that it's difficult to understand the information in the web without having any clue about its meaning. So how do we determine meaning and what does it depend on? So for this we have to define a few expressions that are really important when we talk about meaning. So first we have to talk about syntax of natural language, we have to talk about semantics, we have to talk about context, pragmatics, and in the end of experience. So let's start with the syntax. Syntax is a Greek word, so it comes from Greek. Syntaxis, it means arrangement or ordering. And it has several meanings. So in grammatics, for example, it denotes the study of the principles and processes by which sentences of the language are constructed. And for us in computer science, we also have the discipline of formal languages, and their syntax is just a set of rules by which well-formed expressions can be created from a fundamental set of symbols from the alphabet. So you know that from programming languages, you have a certain alphabet and you have rules how to form correct or well-formed expressions, which are valid program statements. So in computer science, syntax defines somehow the normative structure of data. And you need, of course, these rules to form well-formed expressions, to form valid expressions. But then you have to interpret this expression. Syntax does not have anything to do with meaning, but it defines the rules, how these expressions can be formed, and which expressions are well-formed and which expressions are not. So this is the first thing that we need. We have to check the syntax of a statement, of a sentence, and to determine if this is a valid statement, if this is a valid sentence or not. And then we have to look at the semantics. Semantics is also a Greek term, semantikos. It means pertains to the character or the study of meaning. And it's part of linguistics. And there it is focused on sense and meaning of language or symbols of a language. So it is the study of interpretation of signs or symbols as used by agents or communities within particular circumstances and contexts. This means that the meaning or the sense of the symbol depends on the context or the circumstances in which these symbols are used. Semantics asks, in some sense, how sense and meaning of complex concepts can be derived from simple concepts, based, again, on rules of syntax. So one of the, let's say, fancy tricks that we use also in logics is we derive semantics via syntactic rules. You do not have to memorize this, but these rules are really important because we have to show these syntactic rules that they are true for all possibilities and they always fulfill what are the requirements. And then, we will see this later when we talk about logics, we can make use of syntactic rules to derive semantics. So this is really a fancy trick. Okay, but the semantics of a message, it means the meaning of a message, depends on the context, so the circumstances, and of the pragmatics. So what are context and pragmatics? Let's next define context and pragmatics. Context now is a Latin word, it comes from contextus, it means interweaved, and context denotes the surrounding of a symbol or a concept in an expression, or its relationship with the surrounding expressions and further related elements. Context denotes all elements of any sort of communication that define the interpretation of the communicated content. So everything that is required to understand the content is part of the context. And usually we distinguish two different parts of context. One is the so-called general context, and this refers to the place and the time where the message has been stated, and its interrelation of action in a message. And we also have the personal context, and this personal or social context means the relation between the sender of the message and the receiver of the message. So the meaning or the semantics is determined by, of course, which kind of relation are between sender and receiver. And if there are different relations, of course, the message can be understood in different ways. So this is the context. And this, of course, is the so-called social context or personal context. And all aspects of context must be used to really understand a message. But it's not all context. There is more from the side of the sender of a message. The sender can have a certain intention with his message. Of course, you might say this is part of the context, but the intention is also referred to as so-called pragmatics. Pragmatics also comes from the Greek, from the word pragma, it means action. And pragmatics reflects the intention by which the language is used to communicate a message. And in linguistics, pragmatics denotes the study of applying language in different situations. So it means it's dependent on the pragmatics, on the situation, what kind of message you are sending. And it also denotes the intended purpose, of course, of the speaker. So pragmatics, that is the way in which different contexts contribute to the meaning. And now you might say, okay, if I have all context aspects and if I have also knowledge about the pragmatics of the sender, then I will be able to understand the message. But really, to be able to understand the message, of course, you need some experience in doing this. So in this sense, experience considers all information that you have learned and put in context with the world you are living in. And this is, of course, necessary to understanding. So in this sense, experience also is often referred to as common sense knowledge or world knowledge that you need to understand a message or to need to understand the meaning of information. And only then, if all this is clear on both sides, sender and receiver of a message, then something like a successful communication can happen. So for successful communication, first information has to be transmitted correctly, so the syntax have to be checked. If you have errors in the syntax, then possibly also the meaning will have errors. So this is, of course, a problem. And then if you have transmitted correctly the message, you have to check the semantics. So the meaning of the transmitted information must be interpreted correctly. Understanding in that sense means correct interpretation of the semantics of the transmitted message. So understanding, of course, in the real world is somehow much more complex. But for our purpose, we limit understanding strictly to the correct interpretation of the semantics of information. And we will later see, when we come to logic, how we can make this in an automated way. So understanding itself depends on different factors. For example, understanding depends on the context of both sides, sender and receiver, and of course on the pragmatics of the sender. And then the context of the sender of receiver, this depends on the experience of both sender and receiver, because they both have same, similar, or completely different knowledge of the world. And then, of course, both might have the same or a different context. And depending on these contexts, of course, the transmitted message between both might be interpreted in a different way. So if this is a different way of interpretation, then maybe we do not understand each other. So this is a common day problem. Let's take a look at what it means to understand something in a natural language. So there are models of communication, and this one is a very old one. It stems from the 1920s, and it dates far back, even to the Old Greek, to Aristotle. And it means if we have a symbol from the language, for example, jaguar, this symbol stands for a specific object in the real world. But, this symbol, jaguar, is ambiguous. So it has several meanings, and the object can be, of course, it can be the cat, it can be here the car, or it can be here the operating system. Nevertheless, if you hear the word jaguar, if you conceive that symbol, in your mind, there will be a representation of that symbol. So it can be the representation that refers to the object of the real world. So you might have the picture of the cat, of the car, or of the operating system in your mind. And only if both sender and receiver think of the same concept, then successful communication is possible. And as we have seen, this successful communication depends on several things. It depends on the correct transmission of the message, the syntax, and the correct interpretation of the semantics of the transmitted message. It means semantics, and this is dependent on the context of both sender and receiver and of the pragmatics of the sender. And both, again, depend on the experience, so the common world knowledge of sender and receiver. And only then successful communication will be possible. Okay, what does this mean for the information that is put on the web? In the traditional web, we have the problem that you don't have some explicit semantics. So it means the meaning of the information is hidden within the natural language of all the web documents. And in the next part of the lecture, we will see what this really does mean for information processing in the web. So we will look at the limits of the current web again.